I hope that everybody had a week full of bracha. We now started the Parshios discussing the Mishkan. And if we pay attention to the details of the Mishkan, we can glean insight into many of the priorities that HaKadosh Baruch Hu feel are important and that are essential to our Avodas Hashem. When it comes to the vessel called the Aron, that sits in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the holiest place on the planet, so the Torah tells us that on this Aron, that you're not allowed to remove the poles. Rashi comments that the poles were built in such a way that the ends were wider, were fatter than the middle, so that the poles never slid out of the Aron. Why was it important? What's critical for the poles to always be inside the Aron? What message are we to take out of that? The Sefer HaChinuch, who gives us reasons for all the mitzvot, says that it's a practical item, meaning that Hashem would tell Moshe that it's time for the Jews to travel. It could be that the Kohanim, in their zeal to do the mitzvah, to pack up the Mishkan as quickly as they can, so if they had to put the poles into the Aron, they might put the poles in not exactly the correct way. And when they lifted the Aron, chas v'shalom, the Aron would fall. And that would be a devastating experience. So therefore, the poles were always in the Aron, and this way, when it was time for the Mishkan to travel, so they didn't have to touch the poles, they just had to pick the Aron up. Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says that the reason the poles were in the Aron were for something greater than just practical, and that is the message that is sent by the poles eternally being part of the Aron itself. And that is, poles represent transit, movement, that the Aron is not something that just stays inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but rather the Aron, the message of the Aron, the themes of the Aron, the importance of the Aron transmits to the world as a whole. The poles, the transit, the movement, the taking the Aron out, so whatever the Aron stands for, it's an intrinsic part of the Aron. The poles, the movement outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim is an inherent part of what the Aron is. So says Rav Hirsch, the poles always had to be in the Aron, because it teaches us that the lessons of the Torah, of the Aron, of the Luchos that were inside the Aron, so that those are supposed to be transmitted to the whole world, and not just to stay in the Kodesh HaKadoshim itself. The Meshech Chochmah gives a third reason. The Meshech Chochmah says that the reason why the poles were in the Aron is for the same reason why the menorah was lit during the day. Why was the menorah lit during the day? Because in case somebody would mistakenly think that the reason why the menorah was lit was for the light inside the Mishkan, and that would insinuate that Hashem needs the light, so therefore the menorah was lit during the day too, as a message to everyone that the point of the menorah has nothing to do with lighting up the room, but the point of the menorah is something else. There's a different theme. Same thing with the poles. The purpose of the poles are not to carry the Aron. The Aron can carry itself. The Torah can take care of itself. So therefore the poles were in the Aron even when the Aron was not moving, to send this message that the poles, while being part of the Aron, weren't essential for any kind of transit. And this idea is critical for our lives, because so many times there are things that we do that we give ourselves credit for. We made a great business deal. We came up with a great invention. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us that while our partnership is important, Hashem wants us to carry the Aron, but at the end of the day, we have to remember the Aron carries itself. We have to remember what's really the driving force behind our success. The Gemara relates the famous story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, that his daughter lost the oil for lighting the Shabbos candles. There was no more oil left, and she was crying. What are we going to do? Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said, what's the problem? Yes, oil lights, but we can't forget that it's Hashem who ignites the oil. He's the one who's behind the nature that allows the oil to light. And therefore, if we lit vinegar, so even though that's that's out of the realm of normal, but the same one who makes the oil light can make the vinegar light. And sure enough, that's what happened. Somebody who's on such a level of belief, like Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, so for him, the vinegar also lit. Hashem is the one who's in charge of the nature. Hashem is the one who carries the aron. Hashem is the one who lights up the rooms. He wants us to be a partner with him in the world. He wants us to feel, and not just feel, but he wants us to experience and to be the driver of a lot of things that happen in the world. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that we have no koach, we have no force without his input, without his supporting us. Here are some of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu show us, open up our eyes and realize the truth of the driving forces in the world, see his hand in everything that we do, so we can always get closer to him. Have a good Shabbos.